Hello, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Good Evening Ghana. Tonight, we are talking about something that concerns the future of our continent. We are talking about Africa and its trade matters. Currently going on in Ghana is the 7th ordinary session of the African Union Ministers of Trade Conference. It's going on currently in Accra, and we have had the very distinguished opportunity to have with us His Excellency Erastus Moincha. He is the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and we'll be discussing matters of intra-African trade. We'll be discussing matters of the future of trade relations for Africa and how Africa can benefit from the tremendous opportunities of trade that are coming up around the world. We'll be talking about the difficulties of infrastructural connection, which ultimately affects trade, and whether Africa has the wherewithal in terms of the financing and the political commitments to establish these links in infrastructure, transport and communication to facilitate trade. After the break, you will meet His Excellency Erastus Moincha. Welcome back. Thank you very much. We are talking about African trade tonight, and I have with me His Excellency Erastus Moincha. He's actually originally from Kenya, but he occupies a very important position and is the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. He's in Accra this week for the 7th ordinary session of the African Union Ministers of Trade. Your Excellency, thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure. Is this your first time in Ghana?
No, I've been here for some time.
Okay.
May I simply say thank you, Paul, for having me here, and good evening, viewers.
Thank you very much. Are you optimistic when you look at the next 5 years for trade, African trade?
Yes, I am. In the last decade, since 2000, Africa has changed and is changing. Growth is much faster than anywhere in the world. Africa is now very much self-aware of its opportunities and challenges. And Africa is present in multilateral and bilateral trade negotiations. So Africa is starting to be assertive. But more importantly, the fact that our heads of state and government decided that come January 2012, they would devote the summit on matters of trade gives me a lot of hope about the future.
When we talk about trade, really, what are we talking about?
We're talking many things. One of them is, first of all, to boost intra-African trade. And there is a lot of scope for that. As you know, that we, as Africa, produce a few products which we sell in very few markets. And that is a big challenge for Africa, because when anything happens in those markets, we get affected. And that is happening right now. If you look at Europe, they have gone through a recession, and there is another recession on the way. And the impact of that recession is that there is a reduced demand because disposable income has gone down. Government are having problems with their budgets. And so our exports are also not getting into those markets. It is important for us to start diversifying our markets. Our markets, for instance, we can now be able to sell to Asia. We should be developing new routes to the States and so forth. So that's one aspect. The second aspect of trade, under the WTO arrangements, you know, Africa has had its voice. If you look at what happened in Cancun, what happened in Seattle, what is happening right now, without Africa's vote, that agreement cannot continue as it is. There are attempts to bypass the WTO and create other mechanisms. But this will also fail, because globally, everybody knows that Africa is the source of raw materials. Africa is home of a market. So they will still have to come to talk to us, whatever channels they may take. So this gives me a lot of hope in terms of issues of intra-African trade and also multilateral trade.
But when you go around Africa, you will notice in terms of the resources that whereas the resources, yes, may belong to the people of Africa, in terms of mechanizing those resources and creating them into viable products and earning money out of them, that whole production process is controlled by essentially non-Africans. If you take the very rich resources like gold and oil and perhaps cocoa, you will essentially find that the non-African group, usually from the richer countries, companies from the richer countries, control the mechanization of these processes. What then will it benefit Africa even if we expand the trade markets? It means that you will expand the trade markets, but the essential profits will continue to go to international conglomerates.
Well, there are two questions, as it were, that you have asked in one. The first part of it, yes, our extraction industries of the raw materials are owned by corporates in the north. Now, there are things which are changing now. There is what is now called natural resources governance. And at the African Union, we are now pushing this. That governance has two elements. That the sending country must ensure that those corporates take on responsibility to do certain closures in terms of governance of those raw materials. And the governments in which these raw materials reside have also the responsibility to adopt certain practices. For instance, to ensure that the revenue that is accruing, for instance, from oil, can benefit the local people. You have seen what is happening in parts of the continent where local populations do not, recognize the benefit coming out of that industry. They will go to war. And so how long will you continue to retain this kind of thing? The second part of the question you asked, if we create markets, those industries will take advantage. Now, we have to start developing trade defense measures that if a product is coming from outside and we believe it's not of interest to us, we have to have a method on how to protect our own interest. But secondly, if anybody is coming from the north, add value to our raw materials, take advantage of our markets, so be it. And eventually, let's also now start to develop African multinational industries. And there are already some which are happening. I've seen EcoBank that is spreading. I have seen industries from South Africa, from Nigeria that are now moving across the border. So I think this is the future that we should go. Let's nurture our own and help them to become strong like the rest of the world.
So, Your Excellency, you know more than me that the first part of your answer, you hinted protectionism. And that's really an anathema in international trade, isn't it? Nobody wants to hear that word.
It's an anathema, but it happens. And you have got to be strategic. Look at Europe. They know they cannot produce efficiently in terms of agro-industries. They protect them. You go to America, they do the same. So it's a question of smart
But you must have political power to do that.
And that political power is the will of the people.
You must have international political power. You must be a big man in the international geopolitics to be able to decide that I've closed my market.
But you know, Africa, if we all come together and speak with one voice, if you're going to speak as Ghana, you will not be a heavyweight. But if it's the entire continent that comes together and say, let's give priority to our own integration, that will carry weight more than